right, so today we're going deep on Somaliland. You sent over a ton of articles and analysis on this, and it seems like we really want to figure out what's going on over there. Is it just another struggling African nation, or is there more to the story? Well, get this. Some people in Somaliland are looking to Donald Trump as like the key to their future. How is that possible? Let's find out.
Well, Somaliland is fascinating because it's often overshadowed by all of the struggles that are happening in Somalia.
Yeah.
But Somaliland has this really unique story to tell, a story of resilience and self-reliance, and a totally different approach to nation building than what we're used to seeing.
Okay, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, where exactly is Somaliland? I think a lot of people would have trouble placing it on a map.
Imagine Africa, shaped like a triangle. Somaliland is right at the tip, the very northeastern corner, what we call the Horn of Africa. It's this little sliver of land nestled along the Gulf of Aden, with Yemen just across the Red Sea.
Okay, so we're talking about a strategically important location then. At the crossroads of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. That has to play a factor in all of this, right?
Absolutely. Throughout history, that location has been super important for trade routes, and more recently, it's become a focal point for security concerns.
Yes.
It's really in the thick of things, and that's definitely going to come into play as we look at why major powers like the U.S. and China are taking an interest in Somaliland. But before we get into all of that,
Okay.
let's rewind a bit and understand how Somaliland even came to be. Because I think there's often confusion about Somaliland versus Somalia. Are they the same thing? Are they different? What's the story there?
Yeah, I'll admit, I'm a little fuzzy on the history myself.
Well, you have to understand that Somaliland and Somalia have very distinct pasts. Before 1960, Somaliland was actually a British protectorate, while the South, which became Somalia, was under Italian rule. So right from the start, you had these two separate entities with different systems of governance, different cultures, almost like two siblings raised in totally different households.
Okay, so then what happened? Did they just decide to become one big happy family?
Not exactly. They merged in 1960 to form the Somali Republic. But it was kind of a forced marriage from the start. And in 1991, when Somalia's central government collapsed, Somaliland said enough is enough and declared their independence.
Wow, so imagine your country just implodes like that. What would you do? That seems like it was a huge turning point.
It was absolutely a huge turning point. At that moment, Somaliland took a very different path than Somalia. While Somalia descended into chaos and civil war, Somaliland really focused on rebuilding. And what's remarkable is they did that from the ground up. They prioritized local needs and built a functioning state without relying on international handouts.
And they actually managed to make this work, it seems like, at least from the articles that you sent. They've had a pretty impressive track record.
It's really quite remarkable. Somaliland established a democratic system. They held their first multi-party elections in 2003, and they've had peaceful transitions of power ever since. That's huge, especially when you consider the instability that continues to plague Somalia. It really highlights this. Different approach to state building. One that prioritizes grassroots development and self-reliance over dependence on foreign aid.
So it sounds like while Somalia has been struggling with civil war and terrorism and a government that can't seem to get its act together, Somaliland has been quietly building this stable and peaceful society.
Exactly. It's like night and day.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that Somaliland has done all of this with very little international support. They've been largely overlooked, even though their model might hold valuable lessons for other nations facing similar challenges.
So what are the key ingredients to their success? What have they done differently that has allowed them to thrive while Somalia continues to struggle?
Well, one of the core pillars of Somaliland's success is their unique clan-based political system. It's not what you typically see in a Western democracy, but it's incredibly effective in Somaliland's context. You see, in many parts of Somalia, clan rivalries have fueled conflict and instability. But in Somaliland, they've actually managed to create a system where different clans share power. They participate in decision-making, and they have a stake in the stability of the nation.
So they've turned what could be a source of division into a source of strength. That's pretty ingenious.
Exactly. It's all about checks and balances. Think of it like this well-crafted agreement where everyone has a voice at the table, and no single clan can dominate the others. This has been really crucial in preventing the kind of factionalism that's torn Somalia apart.
So they have this unique political system that promotes stability and inclusivity. But what about their economy? How have they managed to build a functioning economy in such a challenging environment?
That's another area where Somaliland has taken a different approach. They've focused on developing key sectors like livestock agriculture and fishing, which are the traditional backbone of their economy. They've also made strategic investments in infrastructure, especially their ports, which have become important hubs for trade in the region.
So they're leveraging their strategic location to their advantage.
Absolutely. Take Berbera Port, for instance. It's strategically located on the Gulf of Aden, and it's been undergoing major expansion and modernization, making it an attractive alternative to other ports in the region. This has helped to attract foreign investment and boost their economy.
It sounds like Somaliland has been quietly building this success story. They've established a functioning democracy, fostered a relatively stable society,
Yeah.
and are making strides economically. But I'm guessing this hasn't gone unnoticed by the big players on the global stage.
You're right. Somaliland's stability and strategic location have made it increasingly attractive to countries like the United States, particularly with all the competition with China going on.
Now this is where things start to get interesting.
It does. Somaliland has become a pawn in a much larger geopolitical chess game. And that's where the story takes this fascinating turn. I think that's a good place to leave our listeners today with those questions in mind. Somaliland's story is still unfolding, and it's one that we should all be paying attention to, not just for its strategic implications, but for what it tells us about the human desire for self-determination, the complex realities of nation-building, and the choices we make as global citizens.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Somaliland. We hope you learned something new, gained a new perspective, and maybe even came away with more questions than answers.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning,
Yeah.
and keep diving deep